morning. Former British Prime Minister William Gladstone once had a young man come to his office for some advice. And Mr. Gladstone asked the young man, he said, "So what are your dreams and your aspirations?" And the young man responded, "Well, first I want to get into law and then into politics." And Gladstone responded, "Then what?" The young man said, "Well, I guess, fame and fortune." And Gladstone responded, "Then what?" And the young man said, "Well, I guess make a lot of money and retire." And Gladstone responded, "Then what?" And the young man said, "Well, I guess then, I die." And Gladstone said, "Then what?" And there was silence. And finally, Gladstone broke the silence by telling the young man, "I think you need to go back and rethink life." The entire Bible is an answer to the question, then what? All of Scripture answers this question. We see it over and over again. The Bible presents life as more than persecution, more than suffering, more than pain, more than wealth and prosperity. Yes, this world is God's creation. And yes, everything He made was good. Of course, man distorted it, right? But everything He made was very good, in fact, and He expects us to enjoy His creation. But this current world that we're living in was never the fulfillment of the plan. It was never intended to be. The great truth about life is that it's going somewhere. This isn't all that there is. Scripture invites us to ask the question, then what? It invites us to cling to that answer and to hold on to it with all of our being, because then what is the focal point of Scripture? And the answer to this question means everything. You might remember earlier in the year we talked about Jesus being meek in this series. And we looked at His famous Sermon on the Mount, and we looked at the beatitude that said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And we talked about how this beatitude was plucked straight from the Old Testament Scriptures. It comes from Psalm 37. And Psalm 37 is a part of Israel's hymn book. It's a song that was sung by Israel. Why? Why did they sing this song? What was going on in their world that they would be singing at this time? Why do we sing? Well, we sing to remember, don't we? All of you probably learned the ABCs by singing them. You probably learned the books of the Bible, or maybe the names of the apostles, by singing them, because when you set it to a tune, it's easier to remember. We know that songs stir up nostalgia and sentimentality. All of us probably have a song that when we hear it come on the radio, it takes us back to when we were in high school, cruising down the strip, maybe. Songs also can uplift us or bring us down. Some of you were dating a girl or a guy in high school, and y'all had a song. And you broke up, and you hear that song, and you start weeping and wailing bitterly. Songs can do so much to change our attitude or to help us to remember or to focus us. Some of you, when you hear a song come on the radio, you just have to get up and dance even though you have no business doing so. So what is going on in Israel's world surrounding Psalm 37? Why would they be singing this song? Listen to what it says. "Fret not yourself because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself, it tends only to evil. For the evildoer shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. In just a little while the wicked will be no more. Though you look carefully at his place, he will not be there. But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." Evil will not win. That's the theme of this song. That is the major theme of the psalm, that evil will not win, that God has got this, that He is in control, and He's going to bring about their victory. Notice the language. "Do not fret, trust in the Lord and do good, commit your way to the Lord, Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Why? Why shouldn't I worry? Why shouldn't I be anxious? Why should I trust in God? Because He's the one that's going to bring about your victory, right? The wicked will be no more, and guess who's going to be left? The meek. The meek are going to be left. They're going to inherit the land. What land? Well, verse 29 tells us, the righteous shall inherit the land and dwell upon it forever, the land that was promised to them. The Israelites were singing to remind themselves that God has got this, that God is in control. This is a hymn of encouragement because there are times in life when it seems like evil is winning. And I don't know about you, but I can easily want to take revenge. I want to get angry and do something about it. But if this psalm teaches us nothing, it says don't do that. Why? Because God is in control. Vengeance and wrath are His domain, not mine. Because when I get angry, I act in ways that are unrighteous. Almost always. When we get angry, we act in ways that are ungodly. And it's not our realm. That belongs to God. And so the meek wait patiently. They let God work. They allow Him to be in control. In other words, the meek are just to delight themselves in the Lord and do good as they wait patiently. Remember what the Hebrew word for meek is? We talked about it earlier in the year in that sermon I just mentioned. The Hebrew word for meek is anav. Remember what it means? It means poor, afflicted, could mean humble. The anav are those who are meek, and meekness assumes adversity. Meekness presupposes affliction. In fact, meekness doesn't really exist in the absence of affliction. It's an attitude or an orientation toward the adversity a person is experiencing. We often say things like, well, meekness is not weakness. Yeah, but the meek can be weak. They were here. Notice it again. This time verses 12 through 14. The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him. But the Lord laughs at the wicked, for He sees that his day is coming. The wicked draw the sword and bend their bows to bring down the poor and the needy, to slay those whose way is upright. Who are the poor and the needy? The anav, the meek. In fact, poor and needy are just other words for anav, right? That's the definition of meek. Because what we do sometimes, and maybe you've heard sermons like this, is we have sermons where we say, put yourself in the position of Gideon, and you too can go out into battle outnumbered 450 to 1 because God has got this and He's on your side. Whatever you're battling, be a Gideon. Or be a David and slay the giant in your life. When the truth is, if you were living in this day and time, you would have been Joe Israelite standing on the sideline, not being able to do anything. You'd be privy to your circumstances, hoping something could be done. You wait. You wait patiently for God to act, for God to do something, because sometimes you're just at the mercy of your circumstances, right? Sometimes there's nothing more than you can do. Sometimes you're afflicted, sometimes you're poor and needy, and here's how the meek are to respond. Wait for the Lord and keep His way, and He will exalt you to inherit the land. You will look on when the wicked are cut off. Meekness says, I will wait. I will wait for the Lord. I will allow Him to work. I will let Him be in control, because that whole vengeance and wrath thing is His domain, not mine. Meekness is a path to victory. The Israelites were headed to the promised land. That wasn't in question. All they had to do was trust in the one who was leading them so that they could enter. And you know, my friends, we are the anav. You realize that, don't you? We are the new Israel. Their story is our story, because we're afflicted, aren't we? Are we not? We face an enemy, don't we? A very real enemy. What is that enemy's name? Well, you can call it a lot of different names. Alzheimer's, mass shootings, terrorist attacks, cancer. I don't care what name you give it. It's evil. It's death. That is our enemy. And on this side of eternity, it can seem like death is winning, can't it? On this side of the cross, it can appear as though death is winning, that evil has the upper hand, that the bully is getting the best of us. In fact, we say things like that. Even as Christians, we say things like, well, you know, they lost their battle with cancer. Alzheimer's is what got them in the end. No, No, cancer never wins against the Christian. Alzheimer's never beats us. Death never wins for the person who is in Christ. Rid that thinking from your mind. The Anav always win when they trust in God and do good, when they wait patiently for Him and allow Him to work. Still, we all share a common enemy, and we all face affliction. We all face death. And in those moments, we say, God, please do something. And God says, I have. I have. But now Christ has been raised from the dead, first fruits of those who are asleep. For since by a man came death, by a man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive, but each in his own order. Christ, the first fruits, after that, those who are Christ at His coming. Then comes the end when He hands over the kingdom to the God and Father, when He has established or abolished all rule and all authority and power, for He must reign until He has put all His enemies under His feet. The last enemy that will be abolished is death. You ever had a brush with death? You ever had a near-death experience? I was a kid in junior high or high school. My parents gave me a motorcycle. I have no idea why. I'm riding my motorcycle, about to go around a curve, and my wheels come out from under me. It had been raining, the pavement was wet, and I go sliding on my belly around this curve, and all I could think was, I sure hope a car isn't coming. Thankfully, it wasn't, and I slid off into the ditch. Only real injury was a bad case of road rash, but that was a scary experience. I don't know if it was a near-death experience, but it was scary. You ever had a near-death experience? I think about the survivors of 9/11. I think about that soldier who comes home from Iraq after stepping on an IED, who should have lost his life, but instead loses a limb or two. I think about the person who has survived cancer. I think about the person who went into the operating room thinking that they wouldn't come out alive, and yet they did. I think about Austin Hatch. Anybody know who Austin Hatch is? Austin Hatch was a superstar high school athlete who was involved in not one but two plane crashes. The first one, he was rather young. His dad, who was the pilot, and his mother and his little sister were all flying up to their lake house in Wisconsin when the plane crashed, killing his mother, his sister. Austin's father was able to throw him from the wreckage. His father, Stephen, and Austin both survived that crash. It was devastating, but they decided that they were going to make the most of their lives together and move forward, and they did. And Austin's dad eventually remarried. And one day, Austin's father, his new mother, and himself hopped in a plane again to fly up to their lake house. And once again, they crashed. This time, the crash killed Austin's father and new mother. And Austin was left with a severe brain injury. He stayed in a coma for 8 weeks. When he got out, he had to learn to walk and talk and eat and breathe all over again. The superstar high school athlete that averaged 23 points and 9 rebounds a game would never play competitive basketball again. But this is a picture of him after all of that. Michigan honored his scholarship and even let him get into a game one time towards the end. As traumatic as that would have been, I can't imagine enduring an experience like that without hope. Can you? Brushes with death remind us of just how vulnerable we are. And they may also remind us that the enemy is still lurking. When death hits close to home, it can fool us into thinking that death is winning. And because Jesus walked out of the tomb, we know that that's not true. We know that death doesn't win because Jesus walked out of the tomb. And because He walked out of the tomb, we're going to walk out of the tomb as well. That is what Paul is stating when he presents Jesus as the first fruits of the coming resurrection. First fruits here simply means the first of many, or the first with more to follow. Jesus is raised first. And you say, but He wasn't. Lazarus was raised first before Jesus. That widow of Nain, her son was raised before Jesus. Yeah, but they both had another funeral. Jesus didn't. Jesus walked out of the tomb never to return to it. And because he did, because he went first, and because there are many more to follow, we can take that to the bank. And we can know that we too someday will walk out of the tomb never to return to it. Now, this is a hard thing for some to swallow. It was hard for the Corinthian brethren to swallow, at least some of them. Some of the Corinthians had a problem with this. They denied a bodily resurrection. So, Paul, you mean to tell me that a person who has been laying in the ground for hundreds of years to where they're almost disintegrated and almost nothing left, that they're somehow going to be put back together in a body and they're going to walk out of the tomb? You're telling me that someone who has been cremated or burned beyond recognition, somehow their body is going to be put back together and they're going to walk out of the tomb? And Paul says that's exactly what I'm saying. That is absolutely what I'm saying. And how do we know that's what he's saying? Well, because he uses the Greek term anastasis for resurrection. And that word means this: to sit up, a raising from a seat, raising from the dead. If he's not talking about your physical body, what's he talking about? Secondly, at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul speaks of how our bodies will be changed. And so if Paul is not talking about this body, then what body is he talking about? But that does bring up some questions, right? What's this body going to be like? Will James go back to his 20s when he had those washboard abs? Will I get some of my hair back? I mean, will I look like I did when I was 16, or will I look like, I do when I'm 47? What's this going to be like? And Paul doesn't answer those questions. He simply says this: these bodies will be immortal, they will be imperishable, and they will be powerful. Neither weakness, nor disease, nor deformity, nor any other ailment will plague these resurrection bodies. Paul does say that they will be spiritual in nature. In fact, in verse 44 of 1 Corinthians 15, he specifically says they will be sown a natural body and raised a spiritual body. Understand, please, because we have gotten this wrong for so many years. Paul is not making a contrast between spiritual and physical. We do that all the time, and we've done it for many years, and it's almost more Gnosticism than anything else, which is a heresy that John fought against. It comes from Plato and Platonism, and it's wrong. We've often garnered this thinking that the spiritual part of me is what really matters, and the physical part of me doesn't matter at all. But to Jewish thinking, it was all one. It all mattered. Your physical, your spiritual, it was all considered together. So Paul's not making some dichotomy between the spiritual and physical, because Paul didn't believe, and you shouldn't either, that you're going to be just some disembodied spirit floating around in the air somewhere. We're promised bodies, right? And a spirit doesn't have a body necessarily, right? If we're promised a body, so we're not going to be spirits floating around playing a harp. Paul is contrasting physical and carnal. That's what he's contrasting. He's contrasting physical and natural. And he's saying your spiritual body is not going to be the result of natural procreation. It's going to be the result of supernatural forces. It's going to be changed in some way, but you're going to inherit that body again, and you're going to walk out of the tomb. In other words, you're not going to be a disembodied spirit that's given wings and floats around from cloud to cloud playing a harp. Again, a spirit has a body, and we are promised bodies, so we cannot be spirits when resurrected. Plus, Jesus says he's the first fruits of the resurrection and promises that there's more to come. Let me ask you this. What is the biggest problem for someone outside of Christ? And you say, well, they're lost in their sins, right? And that's how we present the gospel. God is mad at you because you're a sinner. Do something to appease his wrath. And certainly, being lost in sin is a major problem, right? We need the blood of Christ to cleanse us from our sins. But understand, too, that in Paul's thought, our biggest problem was death. We're all going to die. And death is the last enemy. We're all going to die, and that's a major problem. So what are you going to do about that problem? What's the solution to the problem? You see, we do this as well. We often present death like it's some good thing. And we quote Psalm 116 and verse 15, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his godly ones. I don't think it's wrong to quote that at funerals, just as long as we understand that if you read through the whole psalm, the psalmist is praising God from saving him from death. The psalmist is praying that God would save him from death, and God does, and so he's praising God for saving him from death. But this in no way intonates that God is okay with death, or that God thinks that death is a good thing. Death is not a good thing. Death is the enemy. It always has been. And one day the final enemy will be destroyed, right? But death is not a good thing in and of itself. God does not take lightly death. He takes it very seriously. Whether you're a 100-year-old man or a one-day-old infant, He takes the death of His godly ones seriously. Death is not something that He looks upon with favor. Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus. Why? Because He saw what death does to people that He loves. Death is not a good thing. Death entered the picture in the Garden of Eden with the fall of man, and it's been a problem ever since, and that's why God sent His Son to defeat death. And you look at verse 22 of 1 Corinthians 15, it reads, "For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive." Since the fall of man, humanity's biggest problem has been a lack of access to the tree of life. Both Adam's sin and our sin is the root cause of that problem, yes. But death is the real problem, because if you're outside of Christ, death means you spend eternity away from the Heavenly Father. Death is a scary thing. Death is met with uncertainty and fear, even by Christians. And I've heard people trying to console, saying, you're a Christian, you need to have more faith, you shouldn't be afraid of death. No, death is going to bring uneasiness, because death is the enemy. You can understand why it would bring uneasiness. It is the enemy. But it's not a problem for us, right? Not a problem for the Christian. Death does not win. It doesn't have the final say. We win. All are going to die. And that's a huge problem if you're outside of Christ. If you're in Christ, it's no problem at all. Because while death is the enemy, while it may bring fear and uneasiness, Paul wrote this, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." It's as if Paul is taunting death. Like that wide receiver coming across the middle, and the defensive back lays him out and then stands over him and taunts him. That's what Paul's doing. It's like he's standing over death and he's taunting death. Where is your victory? Where is your sting? The Greek there refers to a bee that's lost its stinger. How scary is a bee that can't sting you? Paul is taunting death and saying, you have no power. You can't do anything to us. You've lost. Christ has won. Jesus is our Savior. His blood cleanses us from all sin. However, don't pass over the fact that He is also the resurrection and the life. He is the solution to our biggest problem, sin and death. His blood cleanses us, and He has risen victorious over death, and there's a promise that we will follow Him out of that tomb. The meek will inherit the earth, and our biggest problem will be solved. I like happy endings, don't you? I read a story the other day about a woman who had to bury her 39-year-old son, and I can't imagine what that would be like. Some of you do know what that's like, and I can't imagine the hurt and the pain that you probably still feel. But that's the thing about death. It's no respecter of persons, is it? It doesn't care about what your circumstances are or what age you are. So this woman has the unenviable task of identifying the body. And then her son is cremated and they have a funeral service. And a few weeks later, she learns that her son is alive 8 miles away. And so I'm reading this article and I'm thinking, okay, well, number one, who did you identify? And number two, who did you have a funeral service for? But the article didn't really answer those questions. But the point being, can you imagine the elation after finding out that the one that was buried was not your son? Can you imagine how ecstatic you would be to learn that your son is alive and well somewhere else, and that you can actually go and see him and hug him again? It's a happy ending for sure, isn't it? That's your ending. That's our ending. Christ, the first fruits of the resurrection, walked out of the tomb to give us a happy ending. Do you have hope? Do you have that hope? I believe that as a preacher of the gospel, my job every week is to preach hope. Even when you have to do those tough love sermons, and you're preaching the whole counsel of God's not always fun. Some things that you preach are not always what people like to hear, but you got to do it, right? But even in those cases, you preach hope. Because as long as you're alive and as long as you can draw breath in your lungs, there is hope. And if you don't have hope this morning, don't do anything else until you have it. So if you need to study the Bible with someone, if you want to learn about the next steps in your faith, if you're ready to put on Christ in baptism, I don't know where you're at this morning, but don't leave here without hope. Don't go to lunch, don't go to work, don't go to sleep, don't do anything until you have the hope of having your biggest problem taken care of. We're going to have a song. If we can help you in any way, why don't you come as we stand, as we sing.